Welcome to today's special briefing, co-hosted by Ethnic Media Services and California Black Media, to meet and hear from three of the top candidates for the U.S. Senate race in California. I'm Sandy Close, founder of Ethnic Media Services. Our speakers include Congress members Barbara Lee, Katie Porter, and Adam Schiff. We invited Steve Garvey, but we did not hear back from his campaign staff. A word about our format. Each candidate will speak for 5 minutes, followed by questions from our moderators, Tanu Henry of California Black Media, Pilar Marrero, and Sunita Sarabji of Ethnic Media Services. Moderators will be asking the same questions of all candidates, so you can compare responses. Reporters, thank you for sending in some amazing questions. We have selected 6 reporters who will each ask a question of one candidate. Because of time limitations, we will not be taking questions from the chat. Each candidate will drop off the platform after their allotted time. I now turn the microphone over to Regina Wilson, Executive Director of California Black Media, and our co-host. Regina.
Thank you, Sandy, so much. And I want to thank each of the candidates. I know that only one is on, but right now, but I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule 3 weeks before the primary to join us for this important briefing, to help communities that we serve shape how they write about the issues that are important to you and how you will address the issues that are facing many of the people in our community. I want to also just say that reporters, may be the most important point to bring back this message and to make sure that people understand who they're voting for, what they stand for. And I believe that reporters will be a important education lifeline for the issues that are facing some of our greatest challenges in this state. And so with that, I would like to turn the mic over to our moderators, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Regina. I'm Sunita Sarabji. I'm the health editor at Ethnic Media Services, and we'll start today's call out with Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Congresswoman Lee, welcome. Could you start with some introductory remarks telling us about your campaign and why you want to run for U.S. Senate?
Sure. Well, let me thank Ethnic Media Services and California Black Media Forum for hosting this today. And I have a special thank you to all of you, because as a candidate for the United States Senate, I have seen the coverage of all of the candidates. And I have seen how Ethnic Media Services and how Black media covers the candidates in this race. And so I just want to thank you all for being objective, being truthful, and allowing us a chance to talk to your readers, because it's, especially for myself, it's important. Because of course, as an African-American progressive woman in California, there are really prohibitions against raising the types of money, the $35 million that my opponents raise, compared to the small donors that I've received donations from, and larger donors that I've been able to support with their donations over the years. So I have helped many, many candidates get elected to office, but not myself. And so you all are helping me get the word out about who I am and why I am doing this. And I thank you for that. I will just tell you a little bit about my background for those of you who don't know. I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, in an immigrant community, a border town. My father was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He retired from the Presidio. My mother was one of the first 12 Black students to integrate the University of Texas at El Paso. It was an NAACP lawsuit. 12 students shattered that barrier for allowing Black students to finally attend. It was then Texas Western. And my grandfather was the first African-American letter carrier in El Paso, spoke fluent Spanish. And so immigration issues are very important to me. And also, and I'll tell you a little bit about environmental justice, because there was a smelter close to where we live, and the toxics from these chemicals really had major health impacts on Black and brown people in the communities in which I live. But also, and little do people know that my dad, when he was in Japan, he and my mother had split up by then, that he married a Japanese woman. And she immigrated to El Paso and helped raise me. And I taught her English. But it was during that period, living in a border town, having a stepmother who was Japanese American, speaking Spanish, it really gave me a perspective of who I was as an ethnic person, as a person of color, as a then girl, but also some of the challenges. Fast forward, we moved to Southern California, to San Fernando and Pacoima. And when we got to California, we thought, of course, to be freedom for all. We thought racism was gone, didn't have to experience what I did in Texas. But lo and behold, I wanted to be a cheerleader. So I went to San Fernando Junior High, San Fernando High School. Wanted to be a cheerleader, but there was a selection process. I could not meet that criteria. And so I had to go to the, which I did, went to the NAACP, and they helped me change that selection process into an election. And so Black and brown girls tried out that year. I tried out, and guess what? I won. So that was my first election at 15, and I was the first Black cheerleader at San Fernando High School. And my first son actually was born my second son was born in Encino, California. So I have deep roots in the San Fernando Valley and in Los Angeles. But I share those stories with you because that's who I am. I know how to really address the issues that Californians have, many of the challenges, because I've been in situations and challenged lifestyles for a long time. I was on public assistance, food stamps, Medi-Cal, raising two small boys as a single mother, formerly survivor of domestic violence. And so I know what it takes to help lift people out of poverty into the middle class. I know what it takes to grow the middle class. I know what it means not to have childcare investments and resources, because I had to take my little boys to class with me. So I know what it takes also to start a small business. I was a business owner. I founded my business, had thousands of employees over the course of 11 years. So I made a payroll. I know what it takes to create jobs. I know what it takes to deal with workers' compensation and insurance and pay good benefits, and how that increases productivity with employees and workers. And I know what it takes to address the mental health crisis. I don't have a law degree. I have my MSW. I'm a clinical social worker by profession. I formed a community mental health center, and I know the crisis of mental health. And so I know what it takes to address all of these crises and challenges that many Californians have. In our state, 40 million people, 20 million, one paycheck away from poverty. And a large percentage of those are people of color. And so I am running to be the next United States Senator, so that my perspective and my experience, my lived experiences, and the experiences that I've had in being a negotiator, appropriator, and legislator to get the job done in a bipartisan way is in the Senate on behalf of Californians. I'll give you one example. When President Bush was the president, I was against every single policy that he put forth. I voted against the authorization to use force. That was an overly broad authorization that set the stage for forever wars. It was a blank check. I was the only one. And so I'm a fighter, and I'll stand my ground. But you know what? I went to him and said, people are dying in Africa and in the United States of AIDS, primarily Black and brown people, also in India and throughout the world. I was the one who developed all of our global AIDS initiatives, the Global Fund, you may have heard about that, saved 25 million lives. But that's an example of how, even though I disagree with many in my own party, I will find common ground when I know it's going to make life better and save lives and help people really lift themselves out of poverty into the middle class. And so I would appreciate your considering all of my experience, knowing who I am, and really telling the truth about my background and experience. Because again, I'll just close by saying that the Democratic Party convention, this is an example of what I'm talking about. Some of you may know, the Democratic Party endorses candidates. There's a 60% threshold. Of course, with 3-4 candidates in, no one thought they'd get to 60%, but everyone fought to get the top number of votes. I got the top number of votes at the Democratic Party convention in California because my field operation, my grassroots operation, Gen Z for Change, 6 out of the 8 constitutional officers, young Democratic clubs all around the state, Working Families Party, you name it, have endorsed me. And so they provide a lot of the voter contact for me. But the press reported, not that I won the top vote, that I won the plurality, but the major press reported, the mainstream press reported that I lost the Democratic Party nomination. Now that's a perspective that it was misleading to say the least. But I close by just saying thank you all for being objective and reporting the accuracies and the truth, because during this campaign I've experienced a lot of what I just mentioned to you in terms of how it's being reported about my candidacy, because I'm the only person of color, of course, in the race. And so I thank you so much for the chance to be with you, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lee. Our moderators and reporters have questions for you. I will start. In this seemingly healthy economy, so many of us are close to or falling off the cliff. Would you support some critical safety nets, such as single-payer health insurance, including undocumented immigrants, and an expansion of the federal child tax credit?
Sure. When I was in the California legislature, I led the effort to establish a framework for single payer in California. Fast forward to being in Congress, I was one of the key negotiators with President Obama on the Affordable Care Act, and I pushed hard for single payer and for a public option, but the votes weren't there. Some of my opponents in this race wouldn't support that either. And so what we ended up doing, because I had quite a few votes, but not enough for a public option, I helped negotiate a provision of the Affordable Care Act that wrote and said that if any state wants to develop single payer, then we would grant a waiver. So states can develop a single payer. So, and yes, I support, undocumented workers are contributing to this economy, and they deserve to be treated in a humane way, a fair way. And immigration has got to be orderly and humane and have due process informed as part of it. And so, yes, I support that. And I support, single payer. And I right now support Medicare for all, because right now, when you look at Medicare for all, it's an important policy that can lead us to single payer for affordable, accessible healthcare for everyone. And I intend to establish a sister Medicare for all caucus in the United States Senate.
Thank you. Our next question comes from moderator Pilar Marrero, Associate Editor at EMS. Pilar.
Thank you, Sunita. As you know, Congresswoman, yesterday, California Senator Alex Padilla voted against the border package that included Ukraine funding by calling it failed Trump-era policies. And he was referring to immigration, of course. This package was put together by a bipartisan group, which he argued did not have representation of any senator from any border state, and was backed and put forth by the White House. President Biden sold it as a solution to the border issues, which contradicts many immigration policy experts who say there's no solution without comprehensive reform. In the end, most Republicans rejected it because Donald Trump did not want it. How would you have voted and why? And you have 2 minutes for this.
Sure, I saw Senator Padilla yesterday and talked to him about this. First, I would have voted no. And it was really a shame and disgrace, though, that even after the negotiations around this deal were bipartisan and the president supported it, then it blew up because Donald Trump, who is wreaking havoc on the House of Representatives and the Senate, to use that as a political wedge for people, Democrats and Republicans. And so that's why it blew up, but I would have definitely voted no. A couple of things. First, not only did it not have members of Congress at the table from border states, it didn't have any Black or brown members helping to write this. And that's why I'm telling you, representation matters. When you look at the fact that in the United States Senate since 1789, there have been only 3 Black women serving a total of 10 and a half years. That's since 1789. And so I fight each and every day to have a perspective and a lens on every single issue. And think what it is an example, that's an example of why I want to run and be in the United States Senate from California, because that perspective, my perspective, is that of someone who lived in an immigrant community, who knows immigration issues, who understands why Black and brown communities need to join together and fight for, yes, comprehensive immigration reform, and also a pathway to citizenship for our DACA and Dreamers and for their families. And I know these issues because I've lived them and I fought for them. And so representation matters. And it was really a shame and disgrace the way it was handled in the Senate. But I think that it was a bill that if it came to the House, I would not have voted for.
Thank you. We have another question from moderator Tanu Henry of California Black Media. Tanu.
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you, Congressmember Lee. If either you, Congressmember Schiff or Congressmember Porter, will replace Senator Alphonsa Butler in the U.S. Senate. There's a real concern among Black women about their voices being heard. As we know, Black women are the most loyal voting bloc in the Democratic Party. Over 91% voted for President Biden in the last election. So how will you ensure, I know representation matters, but going beyond representation to the issues that are priorities, particularly for Black women, being that there are no other Black women, or if there will be one, there will be 1 out of 100. How will you ensure their voices continue to be heard in our national debates and their perspective considered in national policy making?
Very important question, because Black women, and you could just look at in the House right now, we have about 27 African-American women, and we champion issues of parity, equity, and justice for everyone. As an African-American woman, Barney Frank asked me to be the vice chair of the Equality Caucus early on because he knew my history and he knew that I was fighting for equality, not only to fix our democracy for people of color and for African Americans, but for the LGBTQ plus community. Black women fight for everyone. And so it's important that I be in the Senate to have that perspective and that lens that will be missing in the United States Senate. And it's not just on issues of racial justice, it's on issues of equity, economic equity. When you look at billionaires, we have to pass legislation, which I'm championing with Senator Sanders, the Oligarch Act, the CEO Compensation Act, bills that will force billionaires to make their fair share, because we don't have the resources and the investments in marginalized communities to really make sure that there's equity and job creation and business opportunities and clean water, clean air, all the issues that we have to champion. And so a Black woman's perspective on every single issue is very important. On climate, on the climate crisis, for example, I mentioned earlier, I lived in an immigrant community where we had the Asarco smelter, chemicals polluting the neighborhood like you would not believe. Well, okay, I would in the United States Senate, and I intend to champion climate justice. It's an emergency. Vulnerable communities, frontline communities deserve to have a seat at the table. They deserve to have climate justice as part of our climate policy. Green New Deal, extremely important. And so it's important because the lens that we bring and the fact we fight for everyone, the fact that we've been the backbone of the Democratic Party, we deserve a seat at that table so that perspective, my perspective, is involved on every single issue that the United States Senate considers. And it only will make our country stronger, and California.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. We have 2 questions from reporters. I wonder if you could answer them quickly. Our first question is from Rosanna Huang of International Daily News. Rosanna, would you ask your question, please?
Yes. Can you hear me better?
Yes, we can.
Good morning, Congresswoman Lee.
Morning.
Would you be willing to sponsor a bill to save local journalism, and similar to Gorbachev Kennedy bill in the last session?
Certainly, a free and open press is essential to a healthy democracy. And I've been in countries where there's not a free and open press, and I know what that means. And so in a democracy, which is very fragile right now because of Donald Trump, the free and open press is even absolutely more necessary. So I would support any legislation that made sure that journalism in the United States, that the media in the United States was free, and the role and the accountability of a free and open press for elected officials is extremely important. That's how democracy works. And so, yes, I would support any bill, including Senator Klobuchar's bill, that would ensure a free and open press in this country.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Our next question comes from Elena Kuznetsova of Slavic Sat. Elena.
Good morning, Congresswoman Lee. Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question. I represent Slavic Sacramento, a Russian language media outlet, and we serve Russian language community, which recently grew basically because of the war in Ukraine. And here goes my question. How do you see, if any, resolutions for the war conflict in Ukraine, and should the U.S. continue to fund Ukraine? Thank you so much.
Thank you. First, let me just say I support temporary protective status for Ukrainian residents and refugees and immigrants. But secondly, I support what the Biden administration has done and will continue to do to support the Ukrainian people. I have been to Ukraine several times. I was the chair of the Appropriations Committee that funds all of our initiatives abroad. And I was in Poland last year, and so I know the strength of the Ukrainian people, and I know their resolve to win this war. And this is not only about Ukrainian, and that's what I try to tell people in our own country. This is about our own democracy. Yes, it's about democracy for Eastern Europe and Poland and all the countries. And I've been in Vilnius, Lithuania, and in Armenia and Georgia, in that region because of my work. I know that neighborhood, and believe you me, it's not disconnected to what is taking place in our own country. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are allies. And so we have got to make sure that the public understands that what takes place and our support for the Ukrainian people is essential in terms of our own democracy. Because you do not want to have a Donald Trump cozying up with Putin and allow this dictator to win in Ukraine. And so I fully support it. I'm sorry that these bills are being caught up in the politics of Donald Trump, but that's what's happening now. And I know you all are reporting the truth about how Donald Trump is manipulating the House and the Senate with the MAGA extremist Republicans, getting them to follow his lead, which is very dangerous.
Congresswoman Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. We very much appreciate your remarks. I now turn the mic over to moderator Pilar Marrero. Pilar.
Thank you, Sunita. I just want to invite Congressman Adam Schiff to, okay, there you are. How are you, Congressman Schiff?
Good. Glad to join you.
Yeah, I'm Pilar Marrero. I'm Associate Editor of Ethnic Media Services. Congressman Adam Schiff has represented portions of Los Angeles County in the House since 2001. The first question is from me. Yesterday, California Senator Alex Padilla voted against the border package that included Ukraine funding by calling it failed Trump-era policy. This package was put together by a bipartisan group, which he argues was not representative because it didn't include representatives from the border states, and as Congresswoman Lee said, didn't have any minorities in it, and it was backed by the White House. President Biden sold it as a solution to the border issue, which contradicts many immigration policy experts who say there is no solution without comprehensive reform. This was mostly enforcement. In the end, most Republicans rejected it because Donald Trump did not want it. How would you have voted and why?
Pilar, I was very open about my disagreement with President Biden on this. I don't think that the emergency aid package for Ukraine, for Israel, for Taiwan should have ever been combined with an immigration or border provision because it meant that the president could essentially be extorted over that aid funding package by unrelated domestic policy on the border. So I did not support that approach. I would want, first of all, if we're going to be negotiating an immigration policy, I want to make sure that the members of the Hispanic caucus have a seat at the table, which they didn't. I want to make sure that border state Democrats have a seat at the table, which they didn't. I think that Alex Padilla was spot on in so many of his criticisms. I would want to see in a immigration package that I could support a comprehensive approach that includes a pathway to citizenship for 11 million people, that provides relief to dreamers and temporary protected status holders, that provides a pathway to citizenship for farm workers who are putting bread on our table. None of that was included in this package. So I think the approach, frankly, was wrong-headed from the start. I'm glad to see that we now have a bill coming out of the Senate that is what I was urging all along, which is a bill focused on the emergency funding request and separated from a border package that didn't belong there to begin with.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question is from Tanu Henry of California Black Media.
And Pilar, will I have a chance to make an opening statement?
I appreciate that. Oh, yes, sorry, I made a mistake. You please go ahead and make your opening statement. I'm sorry, guys.
No worries at all. Look, I want to begin by thanking Ethnic Media Services and California Black Media for hosting the forum today. I really value what you do in pushing out good information to the American people. One of my first acts as a new member of Congress was to form a bipartisan and bicameral caucus on freedom of the press to champion the freedom of the press and make sure that we held others who were cracking down on the media around the world to account. I never imagined, frankly, that we would have a president of the United States who would attack the press as the enemy of the people. And I'm proud of the efforts that I made to stand up to that corrupt president, because I think the work you do is so fundamentally important. California deserves a senator that's willing to take on those big fights for our democracy, that is willing to play a leadership role in fighting to protect our institutions like the press, but also someone who has a long record of getting things done. And before I talk about my record of getting things done, I do want to have a chance to introduce myself more personally. I'm married. My wife is named Eve. We are Adam and Eve. We have 2 kids who do not have the 2 names you might think. They are Alexa and Elijah. I came to California when I was a kid. My family moved here, like so many, in search of the California dream. My father was essentially a traveling salesman in the clothing business. And he was trying to provide a better life, both my parents, for our family. We were lucky to grow up in a decent neighborhood, in a decent house with good and decent public schools that gave us every opportunity to succeed. And I want that for every Californian. In the state Senate, where I authored California's Patient Bill of Rights and legislation to bring up-to-date textbooks to our schools, I fought to make that California dream a reality. As a federal prosecutor, I took on oil companies and big polluters and smugglers of hazardous waste to fight for that California dream. And in the Congress, I've been proud to fight for voting rights. I think one of the gravest threats we face is this now decades-long effort to disenfranchise people, and particularly people of color. My first priority in the U.S. Senate is going to be to do away with the filibuster and pass voting rights. Voting rights to me are the foundation. If we don't have voting rights, then the whole edifice can come down. And the obstacles that Republicans like Mitch McConnell have put in the way of people voting are shameful, but they're having an effect. People are having a hard time voting, and we need to overturn that. We need to reverse that. We need to make it possible for everyone to exercise their franchise. I'm proud of the work I'm doing in Congress to fight for healthcare, universal healthcare. I'm proud of the legislation that I'm carrying to make equitable access to healthcare a civil right. It just isn't right that when people go to a hospital or clinic to get care, they get different care depending on the color of their skin. My bill would make equitable access a civil right. It would require hospitals and clinics to keep data so we could see when they're providing equal access to care and when they're not, and give people a private right of action to sue when they're not getting equitable access to healthcare. I'm also proud of the work I'm doing to defend our democracy and its institutions against, I think, some of the gravest threat we've seen in our lifetime, to combat the hate we see from the likely Republican nominee for president and his many enablers. I've been proud to team up with colleagues like Mark Takano to push back against online hate, often directed against the Black community, the API community, Latino community. I'm proud to help fight against gun violence and carry a bill that President Biden has said may be the most important in attacking gun violence. And that is one that would repeal the NRA's immunity from liability so we can hold the NRA to account. But this is why I'm running for Congress. I want to fight to make the economy work for everyone, to protect our democracy, to protect our planet. I want to make sure that people can afford housing for themselves and their family, that they can afford childcare, that women can enter the workforce and not be forced out of the workforce because they can't afford childcare. These are my priorities. As a House member representing a very diverse district, I've used my position to make sure that I represent each and every one of my constituents, my very diverse constituency. And in the US Senate, I'll fight hard to make sure that I represent each and every California and each and every community. I was proud to do that as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, to make diversity a priority for our community and the entire intelligence community. And I want to bring that same ethic to the US Senate. So thank you for having me on, and I look forward to your further questions.
Thank you, Congressman. And the next question is from Tanu Henry of California Black Media.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you for joining us, Congressmember Schiff. I have my question is, if either you, Congresswoman Lee or Congresswoman Porter, will replace Senator LaFonza Butler, who's the only Black woman in the US Senate right now, 1 out of 100. There's a concern among Black women in California and Black women across the country about representation, about their perspective and voices being heard in the US Senate. As we know, Black women voted 91% for President Biden in the last election, and they are the most loyal voting bloc in the Democratic Party. How will you ensure their voices continue to be heard in our national debates and in our conversations on national policy making?
Tanu, in every way I can. And I was alluding to earlier what I did when I was in a leadership position in the House, when I chaired the Intelligence Committee. I found that both the committee and the intelligence community were not very diverse, that it was very white, very male. And I worked hard as the chairman of the committee to diversify the committee staff, elevating people of color, elevating a woman of color to a very high position in the community, in the committee, but also in a community, in the CIA and the NSA and the other agencies, that diversity, equity, and inclusion was a high priority. And each and every year I held them to account. I required them to report to us, were they making progress to diversify the community? Not only because diversity is a moral and ethical obligation, but also because it's good for the community. It's good for keeping the country safe. You can't be effective not only in having intelligence operatives around the country and around the world if people don't look like the rest of the world. But more than that, you can't count on them to do the kind of analysis that we need to avoid the kind of groupthink that results when people all look the same, unless you have a diverse set of analysts as well. And in the US Senate, I'm going to make sure that if I have a role, for example, in judicial confirmations, that I'm using those confirmations to make sure the bench looks like America. I'm elevating people of color to positions of responsibility. If I have a chance to weigh in on cabinet appointments or on appointments to various agencies, I'm going to make sure that those appointments are reflective of America. And as I have, for example, in the legislation I alluded to, that the equal access to healthcare legislation that I'm carrying, I want to make sure that we're equitable in access to healthcare. I'm going to fight when I bring back resources to California to make sure that those resources are equitably distributed, that they go to communities of color, that when we're dealing with the environment, we're also dealing with environmental injustices in places like the Inland Empire, where you have warehouse built on top of warehouse, built on top of warehouse in very suburban and urban areas, belching diesel exhaust in the air, creating hot spots. That's disproportionately impacted communities of color. Similarly, when we don't repair our levees, and we allow Latino communities to get washed away, and the explanation is that the Army Corps of Engineers didn't think the property values justified fixing the levees. That's the worst form of environmental injustice. So in every aspect of policy, in every appointment I have to make, I want to make sure that we're elevating people that look like America, that will be representative of every community in America. And that very much means Black women and Black men, people from the Latino community and the API community, people from the LGBTQ community as well. I want a workforce that looks like America.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. We essentially have 3 minutes to go through 3 questions, so keep your answers a little bit shorter. EMS Health Editor Sunita Surachi is next.
Yes, thank you, Congressman Schiff. In a seemingly healthy economy, so many of us are close to or falling off the cliff. Would you support some critical safety nets, such as single-payer health insurance and an expansion of the federal child tax credit?
Absolutely. I'm proud to champion Medicare for all. I think healthcare is a human right, and everyone should have access to good quality healthcare. When my kids got sick and we took them to the hospital, they got good care, and thank God they're fine. But too many families don't have access to that. So I strongly support Medicare for all, and will continue to champion equal access and good equitable access to healthcare. I also want to make sure that we're providing access to childcare so that everyone can participate in the workforce. I don't think any family should be spending more than 5 to 10% of their income on childcare. If they are, they should get that back in a tax rebate. Equitable access, universal access to healthcare is vitally important to me. And I'm sorry, there was a second part to your question. Can you?
Yes. Do you support an expansion of the federal child tax
forward.
credit?
Oh, yes. Well, I do want to respond to that because this is enormously important. I fought to increase the child tax credit. I fought to more than double it. We did so during the pandemic. It lifted 40% of the families of the kids living in poverty out of poverty. I was very proud of that. Now, we couldn't extend it because the Republicans wouldn't extend it, and millions fell right back into poverty. I'm going to fight to restore that child tax credit. That is of fundamental importance.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, you have 30 seconds for each of these questions. We're going to 2 reporters. The first is Wallace Allen from West Side Story newspaper. Wallace, go ahead.
Good morning. Would you support a guaranteed income that stipulates payments for housing, medical insurance, and food purchases for low-income people?
30 seconds, please, Congressman.
Yeah, I am supporting a universal basic income pilot project. In fact, for people that are on Medicaid, I think universal basic income has the potential of lifting people out of poverty. And during the pandemic, I fought for something exactly, sir, like you're proposing. Sadly, we didn't get that done. And had we gotten that done, we would have had a great demonstration of the importance of that model. But I am going to be carrying legislation to create pilots for those on Medicaid so that we can experiment with universal basic income, because I think it works.
Thank you, Congressman. Final question from Araceli Ortega Martinez from La Opinión. Araceli, go ahead.
Hello, Congressman Schiff. Given how difficult it is with a divided Congress to move forward on comprehensive immigration reform, how committed are you to providing legal immigration relief to essential undocumented workers in the form of temporary work permits?
30 seconds.
I am absolutely committed to doing so. And more than that, I'm committed to doing away with the filibuster and passing comprehensive immigration reform. I think in the interest of democratic self-criticism, in the first 2 years of the Biden administration and during a couple of years of the Obama administration, when we controlled the House and Senate and the White House, we didn't get this done. And we need to. The Republicans are not going to help us with this. Democrats are going to have to do it ourselves. I'm going to go to the Senate and fight to do away with the filibuster. I want you to be able to respond this way when you're asked a few years from now, isn't it great we have such a wonderful advocate for comprehensive immigration reform in the Senate? I want you to be able to respond, do you mean Alex Padilla or do you mean Adam Schiff? That's my goal.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for being with us and answering the questions from Ethnic Media. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now turn the mic over to Tanu Henry of California Black Media.
Thank you, Pilar. Welcome, Congress Member Katie Porter. Katie Porter has represented portions of Orange County in the House since 2019. Welcome, Congresswoman Porter. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for the U.S. Senate. your mic is off.
Absolutely. Sorry. Thank you so much for all of your participation. The San Francisco Chronicle once called me Congress's single mom and watchdog. And both of those things are true. I live in Irvine, where I'm raising 3 school-aged and lightly supervised children. And the second part is that I love oversight. My minivan literally has California license plates that spell out OVRSITE. I know when people think about Congress, so many people think about debates, they think about, frankly, bickering, they think about legislation. But one of the most important functions of Congress is oversight. Cabinet secretaries, corporate CEOs, these are some of the most powerful people in America. And oversight's about holding those people accountable. So it's not just about giving speeches, it is about getting answers. It's not just about speaking truth to power, but it's about getting these powerful people to admit the truth. So in congressional hearings, I have 5 minutes to hold these witnesses to account and to get them to shape up. I got Trump's director of the CDC to make COVID testing free for all Americans, regardless of insurance, regardless of immigration status. That was oversight in action, and it changed lives. I got Tim Sloan to resign as the CEO of Wells Fargo by confronting his hypocrisy and his organization's ongoing willingness to cheat Americans. I got Bank of America to raise its minimum wage to $20 an hour after stumping Chase Bank CEO Jamie Dimon with how a single mom working for him could not make ends meet. So it's no secret that I love whiteboards. Some of you may have seen me with my whiteboard, but it's really why I'm willing to wield that whiteboard that I think is important. And it's because I've never been for sale. I am the only elected official in this race who has never taken corporate PAC money because it corrupts decisions. It's the same thing for federal lobbyist money. I'm the only person in this race who doesn't take it. And you can see the result of that in the work that I've done and how I do Congress, working to hold polluters accountable for poisoning our communities, which disproportionately harms communities of color. Holding big pharma accountable for price gouging and for driving up our healthcare costs, for shortchanging our dialysis patients, to hold big insurance accountable for failing to cover mental health coverage, to hold the gun lobby accountable for spreading lies that endanger lives. So I think we deserve a senator who doesn't just talk about our democracy. We need a leader who has acted to strengthen our democracy, showing, as I have, that a grassroots army can defeat corporate special interests. As part of my campaign, I've introduced a 6-point Shake Up the Senate plan, which will get the Senate working for us, not special interests and corporate interests. So right now in the Senate, I think those mega donors, ultra wealthy donors, they control the conversation, and elected leaders talk too much about how to help corporate America get even richer and not nearly enough about how to help all of us make ends meet. So I know California's biggest challenge firsthand, the cost of housing. That's my background as a consumer advocate. And I am really ready to make sure that the federal government is investing in affordable homeownership, that it's working to undo the harms of racist redlining policies. And so as part of my campaign, I have released a 10-point Housing for All plan that would focus Washington on the #1 expense for California families so that every Californian can afford safe, climate resilient housing where they can proudly live and raise their families. So thank you very much for all of your work to keep all of California's communities informed, and I'm excited to hear your questions.
Thank you, Congresswoman Porter. I'll start the Q&A with my question. You, Congressmember Lee or Congressmember Schiff will replace Senator Butler, who's the only Black woman in the U.S. Senate right now, 1 out of 100. Black women have a concern that their perspectives may not be heard in the U.S. Congress. Black women are the most loyal voting bloc in the Democratic Party, higher than any other subgroup, voted 91% for President Biden in the last election. How will you ensure their voices continue to be heard in our national debates and considered in national policy making and oversight, as you indicated?
Well, I am incredibly proud that California is represented by Senator Butler, and she is doing a tremendous job advocating for our state. To be very clear, I am going to work tirelessly to make sure that Senator Butler, when she finishes her service to California, is not the only Black woman in the Senate, that there are several people joining her. There are amazing candidates running, and so I'm excited to champion them, lift them up, and get out on the campaign trail to help them. There is no doubt that our next senator needs to be a champion for communities of color, particularly for Black Americans. And I have really focused on delivering what families need my whole career. Washington has long overlooked the needs of hardworking Americans, especially communities of color, including longstanding racial gaps in homeownership, in education, in healthcare. We know that Black Americans have worse health outcomes. They're less likely to graduate from college. They're more likely to live in polluted neighborhoods. The question is, what is Washington going to do about that? We cannot tackle these problems and deliver for Black Americans, particularly Black women, if we are not willing to stand up to corporate America, to stand up to big pharma, to stand up to big oil, to stand up to those who would gut our schools of the resources that they need to thrive in order to make it easier for Wall Street to line its pockets. So I have really fought hard to level the playing field and to make sure that families have what they need. I've done that both as a consumer advocate, fighting for consumer protection, fighting against discriminatory lending, for example, and now as a member of Congress.
Thank you, Congressmember Porter. The next question is from Ethnic Media Services Associate Editor Pilar Marrero.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. As you know, yesterday, California Senator Alex Padilla voted against the border package that included Ukraine funding by calling it failed Trump-era policies. This package was put together by a bipartisan group that didn't include any legislators from the border or Black or brown legislators. This was pushed by the White House, by President Biden, as a solution to the border issues, which contradicts many immigration policy experts who say there's no solution without comprehensive reform. And this was mostly enforcement. In the end, most Republicans rejected it because Donald Trump did not want it. How would you have voted and why?
Yeah. Look, the bill yesterday was not tackling the actual needs that we have for a lawful, orderly, and humane immigration system. We have to be clear-eyed about the reality, which is that immigrants are an incredible source of strength to this country. They always have been, they will continue to be. We cannot have the economy that we need if we do not have an immigration system that recognizes the value that immigrants had. Look, I remember these fights about immigration well, but I am so fortunate to really have only ever lived in a California that recognizes and values and lifts up immigrants. So I support making sure that we are doing things like addressing the challenges that mixed status families face, that we are have a pathway, a quick pathway. DACA recipients have already waited way too long for them to be able to adjust their status. We have TPS recipients who cannot safely return home and have no path to citizenship. So I think when we hear people say that they want there to be a lawful immigration system, we have to make those laws, giving people the opportunity to achieve citizenship. So I think the border provisions here, as you mentioned, we're not going to really address the needs of the communities that are dealing with people coming to this country. And I think moving backwards on our long-standing commitment to asylum is inconsistent with American values for human rights and for democracy around the world.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Next is EMS Health Editor, Sunita Sarabji.
Welcome, Congresswoman. I wanted to ask you, in a seemingly healthy economy, so many of us are close to or falling off the cliff. Would you support some critical safety nets, including single-payer health insurance, particularly for undocumented immigrants, and an expansion of the federal child tax credit?
Look, I'm a single mom raising 3 kids in California. I get it. I'm buying those boxes of cereal, and they are sometimes costing $6 and $7. We need to make it easier for people to raise their children. Things like the child tax credit, they are an investment in our future. We need our kids to be fed, to be cared for, to be healthy, to be able to learn in their schools. So absolutely, I'm a champion for that. I'm a big champion for reducing the cost of childcare, but we cannot have that happen on the backs of the workers who do that amazing work, mostly Black and brown women. So the solution to investing more in childcare is lifting up the wages, recognizing the amazing professional capacity of our caregivers, and making that federal investment in childcare. I will not mince words with you all. President Biden asked us to do that. It was part of his Build Back Better plan, and Congress, especially the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, wouldn't support it and took it out of his plan. This is exactly why I support shaking up the Senate, why I think we need to elect people who are going to be fierce champions for families and understand the disproportionate challenges facing those of us who are mothers, who are caregivers, and who are raising kids. On your first point about Medicare for All, look, I ran in Orange County, California on Medicare for All, and I won. I did it again, and then I did it again, and I have never backed away from that. Why? How have I been able to do that? Because I tell the truth, which is that Medicare for All delivers the highest quality care with the most choice of doctors with the lowest cost. That's a win for all of us as patients, as consumers, as Americans, as small business owners. Who doesn't benefit? Big health insurance corporations, private equity buying up our safety net hospitals, and big pharma. And they are writing too much of the policy in Washington.
Thank you. Could you just, I'm sorry to, but I wanted to follow up and ask you if you support that for undocumented immigrants as well.
Oh, yes. Absolutely, I do. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Next, we'll take 2 questions from our reporters. First is Anjana Nagarajan Bhutani from India Currents.
Thank you, Tanu. Hi, Congressmember Porter. My young adult children, my youngest is 18 and excited to vote for the first time, born and raised in California, feel an existential threat, as do most young people, due to climate change. How are we going to prepare for the climate change-fueled ecological disasters and increase in extreme weather, like the storms and floods we have just experienced?
Yep. So look, the cost of delay of Washington's decade-long delay on climate are going to continue unless we really reverse direction. In 2021, it cost us all as taxpayers, as community members, about $145 billion because of wildfires, because of floods, because of other climate-related disasters. We cannot afford not to tackle this problem. And a big part of it is holding polluters accountable. So I have successfully led legislation that was signed into law to raise the rates on those who drill and lease our public lands. And I have pushed for bonding requirements being upped so that people, the fossil fuel companies who have made these messes, especially in our communities of color, near our tribal communities, in rural communities, that they clean up their messes. Look, I'm a mom. That is a pretty core value for me. You make the mess, you pick it up. And that ought to be just as true for Exxon and Chevron and BP as it is for my kids here at the house. I also think we really have to prioritize environmental justice as we move to address climate change and have that transition. We can't repeat the mistakes of the fossil fuel industry, in which we put pollutants and polluting industry polluters, we let them move into low-income communities and harm them and walk away. So I'm really proud to be on the Natural Resources Committee. I have put my time where my talking points are on climate and on the environment. And I would point to the work of Chairman Rul Grijalva and his Environmental Justice for All Act as a really important part of how we're going to not just address climate change, but make sure that we address the longstanding health inequities and environmental inequities that we have as a result of the fossil fuel industry.
Our next question comes from Maxim Aram Sissi from California Black Media.
Hi, Congresswoman Porter. Thank you for joining us today. My question for you is: do you believe that reparations for Black Americans are justified, and would you support legislation about regarding that in the Senate?
Yep. We need to look squarely at our country's history of discrimination, of slavery, but of ongoing discrimination and problems. I'm an expert in consumer protection, and I have seen up close the effects of things like redlining in our real estate markets, discrimination. It goes on today in terms of unfair and predatory practices toward Black Americans, the failure to address, to invest equally and as needed in education. So I'm a strong supporter of looking at this issue carefully and trying to think about how to do it in a way that will actually be transformative and close these persistent gaps. So I'm on Representative Sheila Jackson Lee's reparations study bill. I've watched very carefully what's going on in California. My most important thing as we think about this, and I think in part it's an oversight issue, I want to make sure that we actually close some of these gaps, because I've seen decade after decade people pass policies, but the challenges, those gaps not be closed. And so I do think this is a really important issue. And I think it's important we talk about it in a way that helps every American understand they have a stake in reparations. We will all be better off as an American when every single person, every single child, every single adult, regardless of what race they are, can thrive, can be healthy, can get educated, and get a job. So this is an issue where we really need to work at educating our constituents, regardless of their backgrounds, that they need to be part of this fight, because this is about having a just society. It's about having a fair economy, and that benefits all of us.
Thank you, Congressmember Porter. I now turn it back over to Sandy Close and Sunita Sarabji for closing remarks.
Yeah, Congresswoman Porter, I wonder if you'll take one final question from Vansh Gupta.
Of course.
Vansh, could you please ask your question?
Yes, absolutely. So the question is actually open to everyone over here. But my biggest concern as a Gen Z voter is that, politicians have long been telling us these false promises that they will do things. And then when they get into office, they really don't do much for us, and they get stuck in all the political issues that surround the whole House of Representatives and the Congress as well. So my question is, what is the biggest issue that you want to tackle in your next term, and how you plan to tackle that issue? Thank you.
Yeah, I love this question, because it is really something that I've taken a lot of pride in, which is I am campaigning explicitly on the need to shake up the Senate. There's our structural barriers. That's why we hear people make promises and not deliver them, because they're not willing to change the system. This for me is personal. It starts with how I've run and funded my campaign, not taking corporate PAC money, not taking federal lobbyist money, disclosing who I meet with so that my constituents can see whose voices I'm hearing, whether I'm listening to all of the important communities that I represent. And so I think tackling really on day one some of the corruption and perceptions of self-dealing that are part of Washington is how we're going to give younger voters what they have long deserved, which is confidence in our government. So to give one concrete example, so I'm really answering your question, I would push for a ban on congressional stock trading. 90% of Americans think this is wrong. And you know what? They're right. But we have seen House leadership, Democrat and Republican alike, refuse to put that bill on a floor for a vote because they are more concerned about lining their pockets, about their corporate donors, than they are about confidence in our democracy. So this is a great example of, let's not talk about stuff, let's get stuff done that will let younger voters see that we are really going to change how we do business and who we do business for. My customer is the American people, and I'm very clear-eyed about that. And if I ever doubt it for 1 second, I've got 3 difficult tween and teen kids who point me right back to what is at stake in these fights in Washington.
Thank you, Congresswoman Porter. I'm going to turn it back to Sandy Close, our founder, for final remarks.
That was fantastic because really it felt like intimate conversations with three dedicated, passionate, and articulate candidates. We're very grateful because each of them has acknowledged the critical role ethnic media play in reaching audiences that are often unserved as fully as we need them to be. I want to quote my colleague Regina in saying that the most important point to her for us to bring back to our audiences is get out and vote. Thank you so much to all three candidates and to our reporters for making this debate, this discussion, this conversation possible.
Thank you.
Conference is now closed. Yes.